Cinnamon, Mate, or XFCE? Which Linux Mint edition uses the least resources? I installed all three under identical conditions and measured everything. The results surprised me. If you're the type of person who wants to know exactly what's happening under the hood when choosing a Linux distribution, or you're simply curious which edition of Linux Mint 22.3 is more resource-friendly, then you've come to exactly the right place. We're taking a detailed look at the three official variants and comparing them in terms of boot time, disk space, and resource consumption. We're not talking about vague impressions or "it feels faster to me," but about concrete numbers measured under identical conditions on the same virtual machine. To ensure a fair and relevant comparison, all three systems were installed fresh on identical virtual machines in VirtualBox with the same specifications: RAM, 8GB, processor, 4 cores, video memory, 256 MB with 3D acceleration enabled, and disk space, 30GB. Each system received all available updates at the time of testing, with no additional applications installed beyond what comes by default. The goal was to see exactly what each desktop offers out of the box, under completely equal conditions. The test covered three main scenarios: boot time, disk space usage, and 2 RAM measurements. One at idle, system started, no applications open, and one under real-world usage with multiple applications running simultaneously. An important aspect of this test is that I exclusively used the monitoring applications installed by default in each edition. Nothing extra was installed, precisely to reflect the real experience of an average user. For disk space usage, I used Disk Usage Analyzer, present by default in all three editions. In Cinnamon and XFCE, the application is visually and functionally identical. In Mate, the interface looks a bit more dated, but does exactly the same thing. It scans the drive and clearly shows you how much space each directory and partition occupies. In Cinnamon and Mate, monitoring was done with System Monitor, the application included by default in both editions. System Monitor is a comprehensive and detailed tool. It displays all active processes on the system, both operating system processes and applications opened by the user, and provides real-time graphs for CPU, RAM, network, and disk activity. Moreover, it includes a dedicated file system section where you can see how much space is used on each partition. It's the kind of tool you can leave open in the background and always have a complete picture of what's happening on your system. In XFCE, the situation is different. The XFCE edition of Linux Mint comes by default with Task Manager, a much simpler and more minimalist program in perfect alignment with the philosophy of the entire desktop. Task Manager displays the list of active processes and their CPU and RAM usage, but doesn't offer advanced graphs, doesn't monitor the network or disk, and doesn't have the file system section found in System Monitor. It's sufficient for daily use, but less information-rich compared to what you find in Cinnamon and Mate. The first test: how long does each system take to reach a fully functional desktop? Cinnamon reached a fully functional desktop in approximately 35 seconds. It's the slowest of the three, which comes as no surprise. Cinnamon has more components to initialize at startup: the Muffin compositor with its graphical effects, panel applets, notification services, and several desktop-specific background processes. All of these add time to the boot sequence. Mate booted in 26 seconds, a significant jump compared to Cinnamon, nearly 10 seconds less. Mate starts fewer desktop services at initialization and doesn't have an active compositor by default, which considerably reduces the workload required at startup. XFCE reached the desktop in 24 seconds. The winner in boot time, although the difference compared to Mate is small, just 2 seconds. XFWM4, XFCE's window manager, is extremely lightweight and starts almost instantly. The bigger difference appears when compared to Cinnamon, where the 11-second gain is already noticeable in daily use, especially if you restart your computer frequently. One important thing to mention: these measurements are on VirtualBox, where boot speed also depends on the hypervisor's performance, not just the desktop. On physical hardware with an SSD, the times would be lower for all three, but the ratio between them would remain similar. The second test measures how much space each system occupies after a fresh installation plus all available updates with no extra applications installed manually. Cinnamon takes up approximately 11.1 GB, Cinnamon comes with a rich set of default applications, Nemo as the file manager, various applets, the effects and themes library, and the entire Linux Mint application ecosystem. Mate takes up approximately 11.3 gigabytes, the most of the three, which may seem counterintuitive for a desktop known as lightweight. The explanation lies in the fact that Mate also comes with a full set of default applications, and some Mate libraries are duplicated compared to what already exists in the system, adding a bit of disk overhead. XFCE takes up approximately 10.8 gigabytes, the least of the three, but the difference compared to the other two is modest, under 500 megabytes. XFCE comes with more compact default applications, Thunar instead of Nemo, and a more limited set of panel plugins. The conclusion on disk space: the differences are minimal and irrelevant for any modern drive. However, if you're installing on a drive with limited space, those few hundred megabytes do matter. The pleasant surprise is that Mate is no more economical than Cinnamon in terms of disk space. In fact, it slightly exceeds it. This is one of the most important tests for users with limited hardware. How much RAM does each desktop consume immediately after startup with no applications open? Cinnamon starts with approximately 1.2–1.3 gigabytes of RAM used. This is significant consumption for a system with no active applications. This value reflects the real cost of the visual experience that Cinnamon offers. The Muffin compositor keeps in memory the structures needed for graphical effects, the panel with its applets constantly consumes RAM, and notification and indexing services run in the background. Mate starts with approximately 800 and 9900 megabytes. A difference of around 350–400 megabytes compared to Cinnamon, far from negligible. Mate uses Marco as its window manager, which in the default configuration does not perform hardware-accelerated compositing and has fewer and less hungry background processes. XFCE starts with approximately 877 megabytes and, remarkably, remains stable at this value without fluctuations. This stability is characteristic of the XFCE philosophy. Background processes are minimal and predictable, without random spikes caused by services that periodically wake up to perform various checks. The difference compared to Mate is small, only about 15–20 megabytes, which shows that in Linux Mint 22.3, the two are much closer in efficiency than in older versions. This is the most practically relevant test. I chose it because it reflects typical usage for many users: browsing the internet, listening to music, and having a torrent running in the background. Specifically, Firefox with 3 open tabs: YouTube, Reddit and the official Linux Mint blog, Rhythmbox as the music player, and Transmission actively downloading a file. Cinnamon reached 2.6 gigabytes of RAM in this scenario, meaning 32% of the available 8 gigabytes. It's the highest consumption of the three, but remains completely manageable on the test configuration. Mate used 2 gigabytes of RAM under the same conditions, meaning 26% of RAM. The most economical in the real-world usage scenario, a difference of 600 megabytes compared to Cinnamon, which in practice means you have more room for other applications or browser tabs. XFCE reached 2.1 gigabytes of RAM, meaning 28% of RAM, slightly more than Mate, which may seem surprising given its reputation as an ultra-lightweight desktop. The explanation is that in a real application scenario, the desktop itself matters less and less. Firefox, Rhythmbox, and Transmission consume the same amount of RAM regardless of which desktop they run on. The difference between XFCE and Cinnamon at idle was around 400 megabytes, but under real-world usage this narrows to 500 megabytes, proportionally smaller relative to total consumption. If we were to draw a few clear conclusions from all the data above, here is what the complete picture looks like. In boot time, XFCE wins with 24 seconds, followed by Mate with 26 and Cinnamon with 35. If you restart your computer frequently, Cinnamon will make you wait noticeably longer. In disk space, the surprise comes from Mate, which takes up the most 11.3 gigabytes. Cinnamon lands in the middle, 11.1 gigabytes, and XFCE is the most economical, 10.8 gigabytes. The differences are, however, minor and irrelevant for modern drives. In idle RAM, Cinnamon consumes significantly more, 1.2–1.3 gigabytes, compared to Mate, 890–900 megabytes, and XFCE, 877 megabytes. Mate and XFCE are practically equal at rest. In real-world usage, Mate comes out on top with 2 GB, followed by XFCE with 2.1 GB, and Cinnamon with 2.6 GB. The difference between Mate and XFCE is negligible, but both clearly beat Cinnamon. Linux Mint 22.3 is a mature and well-polished distribution regardless of the edition chosen. All 3 desktops run stably, are well integrated, and offer a pleasant experience. The numbers from this test show that differences exist and are measurable, but on a system with 8 GB of RAM, none of the options will be a real problem. If we were to sum everything up in a single idea, Cinnamon offers the richest visual experience and the most complete default tools. Mate offers the best balance in real-world usage, and XFCE offers the greatest stability and resource predictability. If the video was useful, leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next tests. Write in the comments which edition you use and why. I'd love to know. See you in the next video.